All right, all right, all right. Welcome back to the Howard Experience Show, Mindhead series. Earth Catastrophe Cycle, man, from the Suspicious Observer, Ben Davidson. It's part 5 of the Mindhead series. We'll be doing 17 to 21 today. And after today's show, we'll be all caught up, man. I just watched part 21 before I started the live stream, and holy shit, man, it is really getting intense. If you have been following the series, you know what I'm talking about, man. And, definitely, again, myths, legends, stories, meets scientific data, and all the experts, all the things you haven't been told. It's coming out, man. It's coming out with this group, and they are distributing this information around the world, man. So spread the news, talk to your friends and family. Again, have a plan. Have a plan for these things do happen, and it has been proven. If you are just tuning into the stream, just go to the page. We have, before this, 4 other parts. And you'll see all the different techniques they've used, strategies, as well as all the different testimonies from scientists around the world, man. So without further ado, we'll get into it. Earth Catastrophe Cycle here at the Howard Experience Mindhead Show. Here we go, folks.
Bit of wordplay in the title of episode 17. We've got a brand new interview with Dr. Robert Schoch. We see how the shock to your system of the event itself, psychologically, can be mitigated for some. And for the first time, now that we know many other predictions and cycles and Douglas Voigt's timeline, we'll dive into my own timeline for this event and the evidence I find most compelling. We'll begin with the psychological prepping. This event would be so alien that the shock of it could functionally cripple many people, but that doesn't have to be you. Every morning we tell you at the end of the show, eyes open, no fear. Well, what does that mean to you? Things can be scary, but informed awareness of them is different than cowering from them or ignoring them. It is through the process of simulated experience that the armies of the world are trained, and it is different from the physical training performed, and it is also different than what you might call meditation. Simulated experience, or mental practice, is the active, conscious-driven journey through what you might see or experience, such that you are not a deer in the headlights and that your brain knows how to click into gear when the time comes. There is more scientific precedent for this than you might realize. Scientific studies have demonstrated the merit for musicians who essentially read their music, miming the motions without actually playing. It has been proven without the physical arm movement as well. The same works for sports, where a group of mental free throw practicers were shown to have matched the improvement of those who actually took practice free throws, and for groups of runners who devoted the time to mental long distance running, who matched the times and improvement of those who actually got out and ran. There is an application of this principle to what many of you call prepping. It is a readiness measure taken in anticipation of an unfavorable outcome or outcomes with various likelihoods over various timelines. Food, water, batteries, defensive tools, seeds, clothes, fire starters. The list is thousands long, but the principle must also apply to your mind. This event would be extreme. You can survive it, but the shock and awe to the circuitry inside is real. If you've ever seen someone in legitimate shock, you know that. That cannot be you if your children are depending on you. This fortress must be ready. A key aspect of mental practice is informational. Situational awareness is key, and as example, I'll use New Mexico, where I live. Good to know where the waterways are, especially in a desert. Even a small stream nearby can be a bounty. If you know about local elevation, that helps too, especially in relation to ocean proximity. snow caps, or other temperature change between peak and canyon at the same latitude. Other sites to know, and everyone knows Carlsbad Caverns around here, so maybe some others might make your list. Certainly the mining operation maps of your local area could be good in case you need to flee cosmic plasma or into the warmer rock of the crust. And for the same reason, the cavern systems of your area are good things to know as well. It is critical that you apply these basic principles to your own situation, for your own awareness, to mitigate the system shock of the event. By the way, the recently famous Grasshopper Geography site is not only splendor and science combined, but Robert delivers to us an excellent watershed-colored map with many different regions, individual countries plotted in eye-popping color. But beyond the beauty, you can glean useful information about that situational awareness for you in those waterways, using the blue sector here in Central Africa. While lightning fingers outward, water drains to the broader lines and then into the sea. There will always be more water in the low-lying areas where it runs down and collects, but the water that falls at the top of the mountain is the cleanest there is, albeit much less of it. The site has tremendous state close-ups as well to help. It also has forest maps, which are places with potential animals, plant food, shelter materials, and more. There is no real way to prepare for what terrified our ancestors, what glazed the moon, and which may happen again. But you simply don't have time to think about these things at that moment. It is as important to understand them now as it is to stock food, water, and seeds. Let's go into some more of the science of the event here, starting with Dr. Schock and Catherine Ulysses.
At the end of the last ice age, we had catastrophic rains, catastrophic flooding. I believe this goes along with the solar outburst at the time, which caused glacial melting virtually instantaneously in the ice core records and in the sediment records, but particularly the ice core record. We see that we snapped out the end of the last ice age virtually overnight. I mean, literally the microstratigraphy is that accurate. And what happens to, what could be the cause of coming out of the ice age so quickly? We're talking an incredible temperature increase. And based on many lines of evidence I've now been accumulating, I'm convinced this was a major solar outburst, a major solar event. I'm now convinced that we have direct evidence on the Giza Plateau of a, quote, lightning strike, unquote, which would not be a lightning strike in the sense of normal thunderstorms, that type of thing. But I'm convinced that it probably is indicative of what was happening at the end of the last ice age, and that the Giza Plateau itself was literally hit during the solar outburst. But I now am convinced that we have on the plateau direct evidence of this, as we have elsewhere on Earth. And it turns out on the plateau was found something known as the inventory stela. And this is something I've been studying in great detail with my colleague, Dr. Manu today, and it talks about Khufu, the supposed builder of the Great Pyramid, acknowledging that the Sphinx was already there and that the Sphinx had been struck by, quote, lightning in much more ancient times.
The lightning strike that he speaks of is between the second pyramid and the Sphinx. So the pyramid with the capstone, if you will, there that's still intact, and between that and the Sphinx, the back end of the Sphinx. So it's vitrification everywhere and a big scar going deep into the ground.
We have major vitrification because of this, quote, lightning strike. And again, I would stress it's well beyond anything that you would get with normal atmospheric thunderstorms. But vitrification there, I'm convinced, as we're finding elsewhere, that ties in with the phenomena, and I'll use the term cataclysm at the end of the last ice age. When you have vitrification at this level on something like the Giza Plateau, it cannot be a meteorite or a comet or an asteroid, because that would have literally destroyed
the monument.
You wouldn't have the monuments left. On the inventory stela, it talks about this huge lightning bolt knocking off part of the back, basically, of the Sphinx. And when you have an incredible increase in temperature, which is exactly what we have at the end of the last ice age, it's virtually inconceivable that that would be caused by some kind of bolide, I use that term, or impactor, physical impactor that would throw up dust and debris and what we used to call the classic scenario of nuclear winter. We have the opposite occurring.
One thing that always fascinated me is the die-off of the large mammals at the end of the last ice age. And you always think, okay, the large mammals, that's the top of the food chain. Why does the top of the food chain die off? And when you put what seems to us to be the keystone, the missing piece of the puzzle is the sun. And that explains the increased radiation. It explains the underground cities of Cappadocia.
At the end of the last ice age, just about 9700 BC, that is when you have the large, the die-off of the large mammals. It's a major extinction event. One of my fields of specialization when I was a graduate student was vertebrate paleontology, looking at vertebrates and their evolution, extinction, etc. And we were aware all along of this major extinction event. And I want to stress this is at about 9700 BC. It's not the beginning of the Younger Dryas. The major extinction is at the warming period at 9700 BC. And this correlates with, we believe, increased radiation survived it. And certain animals were able to survive around the world in certain areas because they could escape and find shelter, versus it was primarily the large animals, the large mammals in particular, that couldn't survive the catastrophe of the time.
Douglas Vogt says the clock runs out in 2046. The accounts of Major White imply an approximately 12,000-year cycle. Many catastrophists blame a variety of causes over time without a cycle, in an unpredictable manner. To adequately convey my position on this, I'll need to bring in yet another voice that absolutely deserves to be heard in this series, and tie it in with Vogt's fossil record studies and the correct plasma universe examination of the precession cycles. Let's begin here with Robert Felix.
And the more I researched, I realized that magnetic reversals also, as far as I'm concerned, trigger ice ages, and that they return in a cycle, in a regular pattern that we should actually be able to predict.
This short clip of our 2018 interview with Felix sent me down a research trail that culminated the same week Douglas Vogt and the NOVA entered the equation. An important distinction must be made between intrinsic magnetic reversals and short induced ones. Intrinsic reversals are the long-term core cycles of the Earth, and there are also shorter reversals like glitches in that longer cycle, which may indeed be induced. And in this graphic, we see the long-term and short-term events. Long-term black on top with white on the bottom. Those are the intrinsic periods, with the well-known switch at about 700,000 years ago being the one many say is the last real one. In a way, that is correct, but the shorter events are very real too, especially if you are a living biological form on the surface, because you get much past tens of thousands of years ago, and the events are very hard to see, if not impossible. But this cluster of recent times is likely indicative of what these catastrophes have covered up deeper into antiquity. So let's go into what these events are up top here. The Gothenburg excursion is well documented and was indeed different than the intrinsic magnetic reversal 700,000 years ago. The Mono Lake event was strongly questioned immediately after its discovery, but based on repeated confirmations of it again and again, it appears the area they checked in 1977 might simply have been disturbed in the Gothenburg event. There are no such questions surrounding either the Lake Mungo event or the Last Champ event, the latter of which was as next level as the last catastrophe. By the way, even though we can't see the event around Toba around 70,000 years ago in this graphic, the Last Champ event, and the last one 10 to 12,000 years ago do stand out far greater than the rest do in terms of disaster. So let's go ahead and compare the mainstream science-recognized magnetic events on Earth with Vought's fossil timeline, by far his most impressive. With BP here, meaning before present, and we must understand that past about 10,000 years, carbon dating can have some considerable errors, such that the agreement of these timelines of Felix and Vought, especially when corresponding to what has been reported by Major White, and the conclusions of older writers such as Deluc and Cuvier, I am required to weigh this evidence heavily in my mind. But why this cycle, and is there an electromagnetic reason? Earth's precession, much more complicated than you might realize. And not just because in this plasma universe, the polar magnetic jet torus model we've seen scaled from the atomic level to galactic centers operates here and has important interactions with the sun's magnetic field and the electric current sheet of solar wind plasma. Think you know precession? So what they teach just about everybody is the axial precession. We know that Earth's tilt shifts around, and also the seasons just shy of 26,000 years on the cycle. This is the time it takes for our tilt to go all the way around and return to the same place and position. But there is also this thing called apsidal precession. Northern Hemisphere seasons labeled. Right now, July is when Earth hits aphelion, furthest point from the Sun in orbit, and Earth is closest to the Sun in January. But as you can see, that is not constant. Over long periods, the aphelion and perihelion, our closest point, will regress back through the year until it reaches back to its current state in approximately 112,000 years. It is important to know that this understanding came after the work of Milankovitch. He did not know it. Combining axial and apsidal precession, we have a variable cycle of precession that ranges quite a bit, but which actually is heavily skewed towards the shorter end of the scale, such that on average the Earth has approximately 23,000 years for this precession. We must also not ignore the precession through the tropical year at around 21,000 years on average, which nicely matches the shorter scale on the combined precession cycle range. For any precession cycle, there are two extremes of the eccentricity and or moments of phase reversal, where the angular momentum and angular velocity either reach their maximum or reverse direction or are in conflict. This is extremely important for, say, planet-scale gravitation and kinetic concerns, and also for the electromagnetic interaction of the Earth with the solar system environment, including the interplanetary magnetic fields. 2 moments per cycle means we cut the ranges we saw in half, and these numbers start to look very familiar. I support this range in general, with the caveat that we believe the last event occurred more than 12,000 years ago, with a potential 1,000-year error in the dating techniques, and possibly more in a micronova or superflare energy scenario being involved. If you are to avoid system shock, it is necessary to prepare for an attack from our star. Even galactic instigators likely interact through the Sun, and there is evidence in the fossils, magnetic record, and precession cycle of Earth to believe that these things are not coincidentally pointing to an approximately 12,000-year cycle. It should be considered possible that the cycle does vary slightly, as with the apsidal precession effect on the axial, but with our being deep into the latter stages of the cycle now, either way. In episode 18, we will go back to Mars and look at some of the smarter ways to engineer solutions to a few critical problems. Be safe, everyone.
$4 doesn't really buy you much these days, huh? Unless you're a Denny's Guam.
Episode 18. A look at some of the ways to give yourself and your family a head start if you would be lucky enough to survive whatever events unfold. But first, we will have to examine some more evidence of the lunar and Martian variety. After all, the Moon and Mars preserve evidence for millennia, in many ways that the Earth couldn't dream of doing for just a few years. These sequences we've been seeing would not look much different if you were standing on the Moon or on Mars. For some of them, you might as well be. One of the key pieces of evidence would be intact impactors, the tiniest pieces of the shell that cooled and condensed and agglomerated on their way through space. Today, we will not be discussing the large chunks of ejecta but indeed these smaller ones, the beads, spherules, which likely would pollute the entire system if they were to be part of a micronova event. In recent episodes from Douglas Vogt, he examined these spherules at the KP boundary, and they are present in many of the coal seams. Of course, on the Moon, the rocks exhibit evidence of the still liquid forms impacting. Different colors of glass spatter cover glazed lunar rock, with zap pits and many showing the buckshot-like spray. And now, for the first time in history, lunar soil has been transformed directly into black glass in a laboratory, our laboratory. Billy Elverton electromagnetically struck the exolith soil from the University of Central Florida, turned the surface of the Moon into smooth, glazed glass. Yelverton's mark on the catastrophe cycle comes in the discovery that the black glass on the Moon is indeed the burned lunar soil itself, as is likely the case with the black ones on Mars, and it leaves wide open the speculation that the very select class of orange beads with fission tracks incompatible with meteors or volcanoes are the solar shell itself. And yes, indeed, Mars has had this as well, except since they spectroanalyzed it as silicon dioxide, they believe it to be black sand rather than micrometer-sized glass. This is August Dunning wielding the Mars Curiosity rover, 360-degree viewers, and oh, the things they reported and the things they never reported in the news. This is quite the find, little guy. What a lucky happenstance they be in your path on the red planet to allow you to encounter this. Surely there is no way this would be a massive deposition via electric current Birkeland tube, like an L-shell column, and surely they wouldn't be able to see that from space and send you there on purpose, right? Let's wait for sunrise and zoom in on those ripples. That would indeed be sublimated ice helping to show off the preposterous black circle in the desert. There appear to be many other similar such deposits that Dunning has found, all likely to be massive deposits of this material. And while many of the black areas are visible near the volcanoes on Mars, many enormous concentrations are not. And those ones look very different. They move differently in the wind over time, and they tend to also be peppered with Martian blueberries. Now, true enough, the blue is false color. They are reddish-black hematite beads, they believe, which is simple oxidized iron. Iron is higher weight than silicon, and Mars would be expected to receive more via plasma combination in the expanding shell, while Earth, closer to the Sun, would have received more oxygen, silicon, and carbon. In the wake of recent revelations about crystal slush layers replacing the magma chambers in our volcano models, it has now become possible for embedded impactors of meteors, comets, nova shell pieces to be dug deep into the crust, bubble back up and out, eventually as volcanic material, at least some of them. And that brings us to this Mars Magnetic Auroral Anomaly rotating view from the ESA, showing the presence of subsurface magnetic fields. And when we come for a close-up on the Tharsis Montes, the triple volcanoes, with Olympus Mons just behind them, and as we turn through here, watch the area just behind Olympus Mons, 3 single points of magnetic anomaly in a line, on the angle that Tharsis itself is oriented. It is difficult to see this as coincidence, and it implies that at one point, the magnetic anomalies in the volcanoes were over the same place. Whether the volcanoes make the anomalies and then the crust shifted, or whether those are pieces of magnetic material embedded in the surface of Mars after which the crust shifted, either way, it is not hard to go looking for other magnetic anomalies just astride and off perfect alignment with the other geographical features, and it does indeed look like the famous Valles Marineris has a similar anomaly that may have been another direction taken by the crust. And so since we believe this planet and the solar system will have another age come someday, what do you do? While a considerable amount of luck is involved in surviving the event, what about afterwards? Some of the lucky will be petrified. Some of the lucky will be prepared. And I'd like to begin with my plan in this episode, and even though everyone should be unique and tailored to their situation, I believe it might be possible that hearing some of these thoughts and priorities might be helpful for you as well. So let's say you check in on the sun one day, and we're noticing a speed change in the rotation, We're noticing ionic changes in the corona, and maybe even the crusting up of the shell, or an expansion. Whatever else is happening at that moment, first and foremost I find my family. Some of you might be on your own. Some of you would need to get your kids from school, rush home to get pets, and pets are family. Up next is the time assessment. Do you have time to go to the store one more time? Do you have time to head for a bug out location? You don't have time to think this through when it happens. If you're staying put and have a Faraday cage, you better know immediately everything going in there to protect from the EMP coming with any major solar event. And this is where it differs strongly from your standard 3-day preparedness. Well, first, in this event, cell phone and internet are a memory. No need to keep anything related. But getting a head start on the new age could make you both lucky and smart. And while battery devices' time is limited in that new age for sure, same with all electronic devices, there are those which may provide incredible benefit in the immediate aftermath. Small solar panel kits with USB plug-in could allow you to power small devices for many years, actually. And some of those would be your medical and environmental safety devices, anything from a diabetes blood tester to radiation detector. To be lucky and then be smart enough to have a head start means you become a front runner to begin the new age. We mentioned the mental preparedness in a previous episode and how, again, you don't have time to figure these things out when the event happens. Those maps and other items are resource guides, and there are many more options that can be utilized. So as you let your eyes dance down through these lists, I would bet money that a ton of these things are going to jump out to you as extremely logical. If things go sideways, I'll have a lot of learning to do on a number of survival techniques, from food to shelter to navigation, but I've got the books. You don't need to memorize them, but you don't have time to go get the valuable resources when the event happens. Finally, I do plan to implement every fiber of consciousness able to be conjured now and in the future, because we are electromagnetic creatures with electromagnetic wave generators between our ears. Positivity, manifestation, placebo power, these are real. I Am Harp is a great video, by the way. A last quick note. There has been excellent contributions from many of you on many of these videos. If you recall our advice to cave seekers to store food or make sure there's a way that you can get outside to get food, well, the links and ideas that you have shared regarding the extent of subterranean mushroom cultivation had me stunned for most of an entire day. In addition to this incredible bounty, which you do need to research beforehand before trying, there are indeed other cave dwellers around and sources of food. Some of them, however, you may not be too keen on trying. I would love to ask that in the spirit of inspiring Head Start advice for those lucky enough to see the after, let's hear your best advice on some of these topics of survival. We'll include some of the best of them in the following episodes of this series. Be safe, everyone.
Folks, this is Dr. Anthony Peratt.
As most of you know, I've been in this business a long time, and decades and decades, and it always gives me a pleasure to meet new people who are interested in the topic, that may not, probably weren't around when I started this. As I said, under the tutelage of Professor Alfane. But my real field of expertise has been the exploding of nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs. This is the Starfish event. This was a little bit before my time. I detonated 13 high explosive thermonuclear weapons underground at the Nevada test site. And so my paper, and this is a 1990 paper. So it was during the time that I was at Novaya Zemlya and in Norway, along the Bering Sea. characteristics for the occurrence of a high current Z-pinch aurora as recorded in antiquity. On every continent saw this phenomenon because the Birkeland currents wrap around the Earth. And this is all in my book, Physics of the Plasma Universe. I show Birkeland's experimental apparatus as well as the Birkeland currents that he measured. Birkeland currents thread our universe, our galaxy, other galaxies, other planets. We see the phenomena on Saturn, Jupiter, as I saw. And now we'll get down to some things that you have seen. At the lower bottom, perhaps you've seen this emblem on Ben's bus. And it's the formation of a series of toroids and the morphologies that it goes through. Okay, and these are Birkeland currents in space, from the Milky Way to our own sun and beyond. And I've had the pleasure of traveling worldwide and taking geophysical measurements when I was younger, able to climb mountains and so on. And here on the right-hand side, I show a series of petroglyphs where people in the past, the far past, ancient, recorded some of the phenomena result from Birkeland currents. I got Navajo, Armenian, Guyana, New Mexico, yeah, this is close to my house. Spain, Tucson, Arizona, Valcamonica, Italy, which I spent a great deal of time in the Alps, in the Italian Alps, and we found the same phenomena. People recorded this in far antiquity. How far back? That's a major problem that I'm studying right now. Pretty far back. I believe, but have not proved that they preceded the Egyptian Empire, for example. We flipped fields from high energy theoretical physics to archaeology. The archaeologists, the ones that I've met with, and I've toured Peru and so on with, really are kind of frozen into their theses and their professors' theses, and they don't want to change anything, really. And we're talking about many thousands of years back before the start of our current civilization. Very intense phenomena on Earth was responsible for these. There is a statue at the Sultan Airport in Thailand, enormous statue, as big as this room, that shows Lord Shiva churning the waters of the Milk Ocean being the Indian Ocean. Here in the middle, in their statue, they've got Lord Shiva standing on one leg, directing his slaves, who are connected to gigantic ropes, churning this object in the middle back and forth to represent the what they see just off of Thailand in the Indian Ocean. We have not seen this intensity since the Carrington event in 1859, and even the Carrington event was not the strongest that we have seen on Earth. But anyway, you'll know its origin during an intense electromagnetic storm.
Many people who are even interested in space, deep space, have no idea that there are recurrent nova. You know, when somebody said nova, they basically just were too lazy to say supernova and goodbye star. Well, it turns out that's not the case. There are quite a number of these recurrent nova that we do know of. Here's an interesting picture of one called T-Pix. And by the way, this first image was the T-Pix nova of 1997, and this was the T-Pix nova of 2011. It just goes boom over and over and over again. And this is actually how they modeled the eruption. You remember we were talking about the torus jet model yesterday during the cosmology session? In time, we go top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. It's very interesting to see the stacked torus
stacked toroids there, fading into the center point of a Z-pinch instability there. So beautiful plasma physics that we hear about from Anthony Perret, swinging into view with how they're pretty sure the eruptive character is when it comes to at least this one recurrent nova. And so what this is here, and this list will be ever expanding, these are the current recurring nova in the Milky Way, with the exception of the one that was just discovered about a week and a half ago that was in the Large Magellanic Cloud. I don't know if they're going to count that one as being in the Milky Way or not. But it might end up on this list, it might end up on the other list. But take a look over, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column where it has a bunch of years. Those are the known outburst years. Just take a look at how many times these ones have actually gone boom, some of them. And it's gotten to the point where for T-Pix, for Euscorpii, they're actually trying to forecast these nova events that are not full supernova where the star is destroyed, but something you wouldn't want to be in a front row seat for. And you can see right next to that to the right, they have varying time scales. Some of them very short, others very long. The one thing that you can find with all the professors who put their notes online, which is actually a phenomenal amount of astronomy professors, by the way, all of the lectures that students are hearing right now, and some of the best literature reviews on this topic that you can find in things like Astronomy and Astrophysics in the Astrophysical Journal, they all very much conclude one thing on this list. It is egregiously under-inclusive. They say that our viewing of the heavens at this level is so nascent that there are almost certainly supernova that we have seen that aren't supernova, that we will see them go boom again, and they will make this list. They believe that there are many with hundreds to thousands of year cycles that we simply have not seen go boom even once. And when we do, we'll have no idea it's a recurrent nova for hundreds to thousands of years more. That is something that I think that the majority of people who are interested in space and even interested in the largest blasts in the cosmos just generally don't know. Most of us didn't know this until this year, and I know that I didn't know the full extent of this for sure, and you guys have mentioned the same in many of your comments. Of course, we learned that we have, I mentioned the Magellanic Cloud recurrent nova. That's what you see on the bottom right. But also, just a couple of weeks ago, they discovered the first recurrent nova that they know about in Andromeda, and this one goes boom once every Earth year. They're not enormous ones, but over time, this is the shape that it has formed. Now that is some serious extragalactic astronomy right there. And of course, the implication is that this is not something unique to the Milky Way. There's not some sort of special godlike touch to the Milky Way where only you get to do this with your stars. This is probably something that happens all over the place. Stars go nova over and over again, and it's pretty amazing that this is standard. For as much as we've been looking into space and the sun and large blasts and other stars and things, and especially as much as we've been looking into cataclysmic variable stars, Cepheid variables, it's amazing how little we really understood this tiny corner of astronomy. And so, come to ask what the trigger mechanism is, and it is currently thought to be close-in binaries. This is the same trigger mechanism that was widely thought to be the case for super flares. They were unable to see a lot of the companions that they expected at these super flaring stars, and so they now have multiple hypothesized mechanisms for that. But in terms of the recurrent nova, the only mechanism that is out there existing is the binary, the close-in binary that is feeding material down onto one of the other stars and basically causes a thermonuclear explosion on the surface. They have yet to discover any wobble or any companion to any of the known recurrent nova. And like I said, T-Pix and Euscorpii, a couple of folks actually predicted T-Pix's 2011 outburst. They're studying it pretty well. It doesn't have anything anywhere close to it, certainly no binary. So this leaves us with a very serious question. What in the world is happening to some of these stars? I mean, it could technically be that the binaries aren't that big, they're not causing that much of a wobble, but we should have at least seen one at T-Pix. We should see at least one of them somewhere. Open question very much as to what this trigger mechanism is. But we do know that of these recurrent nova, some are vastly bigger than others, and they take various different shapes. And so you take a look at Nova Persei, which was discovered in 1901. And these are two of its eruptions. It tends to be much less plasma rich than the other ones, almost like if you were to have a glass ball and you explode a stick of dynamite in it and like little glass shards go everywhere. This is one of the ones that is high in silicon dioxide in the nova shell, by the way, also known as sand or, when heated, glass. And so some are really, you don't see many of these chunks or pieces at all. You see much more the plasma plumes, these concentric clouds that billow out, almost like if you could picture a full equatorial CME on the sun and how that might look on Soho or something like that. Or if you could put Soho at the North Pole and look down on it. And so taking a look at some of these large events, we came up with this cosmic blast scale. And this is something that doesn't exist, but I think it's really interesting. And there is quite a bit of crossover, actually, when you get down to some of these categories. Write the stuff down if you want. Take a picture with your phone. Try not to sneakily start recording the rest of the talk, you people. But so the interesting thing here is the energies that they're noticing, and when you start to talk about something like the Carrington event, you're talking probably about 10 to the 30 to 10 to the 32 ergs. I've seen one paper suggesting that the Carrington event was 10 to the 34 ergs. Tough to really say. But when you get 10 to 100 times bigger than the Carrington event, you really are starting to approach the lower level of what astronomers describe in their papers as super flares. And amazingly, a lot of these come on stars that are much smaller than the sun. Believe it or not, those red dwarfs, especially red dwarf binaries, are able to put out some enormous blasts. You guys remember the story? It was just 2 days ago, I believe, in the morning news about that T-Tauri binary that put out what would be the equivalent of like an X1 billion here. That is well up into the range of these recurrent nova energies. So you take something where the star is destroyed, and that is a whole other discussion. You take the largest recurrent nova that we know of, and one could see there not even being any planets left around those. But some of the nova that get put out, you really understand that these are cataclysmic and aesthetic wonders that might not be sterilizers of the entire systems, because they do not always even appear to match something that's 10 to 20 times the Carrington event in terms of their energy. I mean, imagine if the top 1% of the sun were to just shed off. The top 1% of the corona were to really shed off there. And I know the corona is sort of difficult to define. Let's say the tallest umbral magnetic field loops would basically be where we'd call the top of the corona for this purpose. I mean, how devastating would that be? I mean, its total energy is going to look like a super flare, or it's going to look like one of these recurrent nova. But a plasma filament that comes off in a tight coiling CME is going to deliver more energy to Earth than the situation I described, which is completely hypothetical, obviously. But it should help give you the idea of just when we're talking about these things and these kinds of energy. So if you were to take that 1% and just shed it all off in every direction, yeah, that's a phenomenal amount of energy. You're probably talking 10 to the 35, 36 ergs. But how much of that actually gets delivered to Earth? These are interesting questions. Is it homogeneous all around the system? And I know I'm applying these scenarios to our solar system and our sun, but that's just way easier to think about. And so let's go over these important facts before we take a little bit closer look close to home. So these known recurrent nova, we see them go off somewhere between once an Earth year, and the longest period we've seen between recurrent nova events is 92 years. And most astronomers believe that many single nova events that we have seen will repeat and make the list, and that there are hundreds to thousands of year cycles that we have not even seen go once yet. So that brings up a really interesting question. What is the mainstream evidence allowing us to say is the biggest boom the sun can make? Now, I have to admit, I'm not quite going broke buying papers from Nature and Science from the 50s, from the 60s, from the 70s, from the 80s, and the ones coming out of the Astronomical Society of Japan now. Not quite going broke yet, but holy moly, this stuff has been explored quite a bit. So it all really started when they came back from the moon. And a bunch of people start writing papers on it in terms of potential solar events causing some of the things that we see on the moon. One of them, Bradley Schaefer, who you see has been writing about this since 1988. His most recent one, it was published in 2012 in Nature there. Making the argument that normal stars like our sun, can have these startling outbursts that really just don't present themselves in any understandable way in the interims between them. And it turns out that, I mentioned the Astronomical Society of Japan, they have explored this to no end. I have only showed 3 of their papers from the last decade here, but they have put out so many, indicating that something 10 to the 34 ergs, 10 to the 35 ergs in terms of a super flare is not out of the question in terms of our sun. And the 2 papers that are seen here were sort of back-to-back works, and they were really beginning to understand how the mechanisms of these super flares were working, and they realized that a lot of those processes are present on the sun as well, specifically in what they're describing as magnetic reconnection and the trigger of the solar flare, and how that works. You've got the loop coming up, and then all of a sudden, why would that current just want to kink right there in the middle? All of these things happen on our sun, and it demonstrably proves that just on a junior varsity level, it does the exact same action that causes these super flares on other stars, and some of them are not only sun-like stars, but they are actually rotating as slowly as the sun. So it's largely believed that if the sun was a faster rotator, it would be able to put off a lot stronger flares. Well, while that might be true, we see these super flares come off of sun-like stars rotating as slowly as ours does. And so there are some papers that have suggested that the sun is not capable of a super flare. But of the positive estimates, which do far outweigh, and the probabilities and time scales do vary, but something like the Carrington event, they say could be somewhere between 100 to 300 years scale. That's the most common one given. Something that's 10 to the 34 ergs, which is very much what the Charlemagne event may have been back in the 700s. They say that's more of like a once every 800 years. And it's interesting because they don't all address the possibility of something larger, but many do, and many expressly state that something considerably larger is even possible on time scales that really are just difficult to understand as people living on a world with finite number of years of science to look back on even. And most of this forward thinking, again, I said, is coming out of the Astronomical Society of Japan. I looked into it. Most of them are over there. Most of them do use the translation services. I do like that they're, oftentimes A&A will put that they've used the translation service. None of these guys speak English. I've emailed a bunch of them, have not received anything back yet, but it's really not their fault. So, the moon. Why did this all happen? Why did this all kick off when they came back from the moon? It's because while probably 90%, maybe more, of the glass on the moon is from meteoritic impact or from volcanism on the moon, probably, there is unquestionably these classes of glasses that are not from volcanoes and that are not from meteorite impacts, specifically the ones that have aluminum-26. The relativistic temperature required for that would require a meteor that to hit the moon big enough such that we would no longer have a moon. When I did the math on that, that was fun. And then there's the super heavy elements as well. It's not just the wild isotope of aluminum, but Z110 plus elements, transuranic elements, present, causing these fission tracks during the cooling and solidification of this glass is indicative. And many of the papers in Nature indeed say that these do not appear to be from meteorites. They appear to be from something as powerful as a little nova. And Thomas Gold specifically was the first to really talk about the glazing of these lunar rocks and how, there are some that are clearly splashed with black volcanic glass or other things like that. And then there are the other ones that are not splashed with glass. The actual rock itself is glazed. Some of those don't have any zap pits in them to suggest that there was any kind of meteoritic impact anywhere near it. And so we have this study that came out a couple of days ago, and I was just so dumbfounded at the timing of this study as we've been looking into this in all of these episodes in our special series. And then I go and I find out that at least one of the authors has input his email onto our website once. So here's the story, and this is as far as mainstream science would allow them to go. There must have been a massive star around when our solar system was forming to deliver all the heavy elements and all the other material. Otherwise, Earth would be a water world. They're not the first to suggest this, but they're the first to take all of the newest data and the hypotheses, put them together, and come up with something that's pretty much bulletproof. So the best they can do is say that when our solar system formed, we were actually a binary, and the other one went nova and is gone now, actual supernova. And it couldn't have been too far earlier, too far before that, because the material would have dissipated, etc. And it couldn't have been any later, they say, because a supernova like that, a core collapse supernova, hypernova, would have washed away all of the material to form the planets in general. It had to have been something that, a star that went supernova close to ours, right at the formation of our solar system exactly, they say. Well, the other option is that the Markland convection elemental separation from Birkeland currents is absolutely real. That Christian Birkeland, Hannes Alfvén, and Anthony Peratt were not seeing phantoms when they did this in the labs. That there is, whether it's elemental creation or it's combination of plasma and subatomic particles, when you have these currents, they are producing through one way or another that entire Markland convection, from hydrogen past silicon, including carbon, all the way out to iron. And whether it's Cassini that noticed it, or whether it's Alfvén and Birkeland doing it in the lab, one has to ask, if those currents are strong enough, does the elemental production ramp up with it? And if it's possible, since the JPL Genesis mission back in the 90s found every known element in the solar wind. Granted, some of the higher ones very much trace amounts, but JPL Genesis mission found every known element in the solar wind. One has to ask if really there was some massive star that happened to go nova right at the birth of our solar system, or maybe if the sun's doing it little by little over thousands of years. We know that the Carrington event was real, and we are pretty sure that the Charlemagne event was real as well. And the best guesses of the people who are willing to investigate the topic are that something like the Charlemagne event, 10 to the 34 ergs, which is literally a 9 iron away from what the smallest recurrent nova are, could happen as often as every 800 years. Now, that's something, when you look at the thousands of year scales, there really might be something to all of the ancestors all over the world, for one reason or another, blaming the sun for cataclysms. And all carved into rock at the same time. The same time that those tunnels were dug in Cappadocia and in Peru and in China and in Australia. About 12,000 years ago, to be exact. So, when somebody wants to build a lander that's going to go onto the moon, or it's going to go onto Mars, or something like that, they have to get as realistic conditions as possible, right? We don't we don't give them our tax money to guess. And one of the places they get this stuff is the Exolith Lab in Central Florida. And many of you know that for the first time in 2018, they offer their stuff commercially. I'm told I was the second person to request some. So, as you know, I've got, and we'll have over at the display session, sorry guys, the students who are here get to see it before you do. We have indistinguishably different from what they've actually collected and brought back. 99.9% what they think Martian soil is, the red stuff, and chondrite-rich asteroid soil. We got a bunch of their soils, and we have a bunch here, but you guys remember, we've got a plasma lab, don't we, down in Georgia. So I sent a whole bunch down to Billy there too. And that has been really fun. And the very first time, he simulated what this solar flash would do to the moon, to the lunar soil, was absolutely incredible. So this is what the stuff looked like before Billy hit the power. I mean, for all it looks like, I might as well have gone to Home Depot and got some of that Quikrete stuff and just not added the water yet, right? And then he blasted it with the equivalent of a super CME or a little Nova shockwave. This is the equivalent black glass that they found on the moon. The glazing of some of the rocks that are in there is the exact glazing that was found on the moon. This required no meteoritic impact. It simply required the equivalent of a massive CME or Nova shell discharge, or even what is possible through X-rays going through the vacuum. We can't make the orange glass. We can't make the green glass. We can only make the black glass. That's all we can do. So these glasses that are green and that are orange, that have these fission tracks that are Z110 and higher elements, and with isotopes like aluminum-26 that we find on the moon, we are seeing that this really might be evidence of a great solar flare in antiquity. And so, real quick, I wanted to do two things with this slide. So, these are one of the final Apollo mission badges on the bottom right, and not a mission badge top right, but the official logo of the Apollo program. Do we have anybody who knows anything about the gods? What did Apollo have to do with the moon? Nothing. Apollo is the sun god. It's interesting that his face is on the moon there and it's burnt orange, just as all of the ancients say happened to the moon. When they blamed the sun for this, the ones who weren't facing the sun at the time described the moon turning red or turning orange or turning yellow. And of course, down there in the bottom, they were kind enough to put the 4 horses of the apocalypse on there in their proper colors, except only 3 of them are actual horses. The 4th one is, of course, the one leading the chariot known as the solar system through the galaxy. So at least they got the colors right. A lot of evidence to suggest that they got a lot of solar evidence on the moon, and that's one of the larger reasons they kept going back and they were so interested in some of these glasses. Now, what you got on the left there is a piece of Muscovite mica. This is taken here on Earth. It is only the 3rd ever found rare cosmological event, they say. I'm not sure I like the name, but they say that they're so rare and they're so hard to find because in every whole crystal there would only be one of them. And they only find them at the exact dead centers of the crystals. They're away from the outside. There is no evidence of there being penetrating cosmic rays or anything like that. All of the black stuff around there, those are normal fission tracks. That's real cosmic rays. That's what cosmic rays look like when they hit. But there's this exclusion zone around what they call the rare cosmological event, and they don't have an explanation for it because they know for a fact that it's not electrons or positrons. They know it's not a cosmic ray because there's no fan out to basically a single twist, and they're far away from the outside of the crystal. All of the ones they've seen here are found exactly in the dead center of the crystal, and they represent a residually input positive charge that didn't discharge outward, but it discharged from the center. And it looks exactly like the cosmic jet that blasts out of a star when it's born. It looks like the cosmic jets that you see from the center of a galaxy when it eats a star, or something like that. They are certain, absolutely certain, and this comes from a fair amount of study of the previous 2 rare cosmological events, that again, these are not cosmic rays. They are not electrons or positrons. They do know that it has to be a cosmological event because there is nothing on Earth that would have done this. And so how do you get a residual positive charge to basically bathe a crystal such that it takes it in and it can't discharge it out? It's still bathed in the stuff. It has to discharge in the center. There's actually missing atoms in the center. No, they're not really missing. They just blew apart and they blew north and south, just like a cosmic jet does. It's really quite wonderful to see that. And I would argue that while not definitive, something tremendous from the sun is not a terrible first hypothesis for this, because right now some people have hypotheses, but they don't even like their own hypotheses. They actually will go and say, well, here are we like to think this is possible, this is a possible explanation. It runs into difficulty when we examine A, B, and C. I think something like a tremendous solar flash is not a bad place to start looking. And so, Thomas Gold, Bradley Schaefer, Anthony Peratt, Robert Schoch, August Dunning, Douglas Vogt, myself, and literally everybody in the Astronomical Society of Japan, at very, very least, can say that the Carrington event is probably nowhere near as big as the sun can go. And the voices from the past supporting this argument come from the Maya, the Aztec, stories in India, China, pagan stories, Aboriginal, African, Polynesian, and those in the Middle East, many of which are recorded in the Bible. The whole point is that these stories that all describe some terrible end that happened, and these go back to really the last age of the civilization. If you know, there's that enormous gap there between the end of the last ice age and back to where Göbekli Tepe was buried. During that time, the tunnels were built. During that time, the petroglyphs were carved that blame the sun. Some of the stories actually survived from the pagans of Ragnarok. And this is something that I don't think anyone who studies the sun on long-term scales should really ignore if we're looking to answer the question of what can the sun do to the earth. Because it's one thing to look back at our ancestors and the stories they tell and say, you know what? You guys did a pretty good job inventing geometry, philosophy, architecture, but we're going to just take your most important stories and just going to pretend that you guys are crazy and made them up. That's one giant leap, especially when they could predict eclipses. Come on now. It's another when we start to have evidence on the moon, when you start to see those glass spherules in the coal seams of Earth, thanks to Douglas Vogt putting that together. This is something that is really a fascinating topic for all of us, because we do love watching the sun, don't we? So I think it's interesting, and it's important if some of these topics, which are definitively outside of accepted science, are going to be taken seriously, like we've seen happen with the electromagnetism and earthquakes. I'm very frustrated that I didn't bring my pre-earthquake processes book from the American Geophysical Union, but that's the best book I bought last year. They released that textbook in June. It's 90% electromagnetic pre-seismic signals, and I still remember being called crazy for saying there was something with electromagnetism before earthquakes back in 2011. But if this kind of stuff when you're talking about a solar cataclysm that happened in antiquity on the planet, it's really a bit more extreme. And to start with where mainstream science currently allows us to go, which is what I showed today, you realize you're kind of on the doorstep of realizing that the sun does something or can do something that we just don't have any frame of reference or experience for.
Some post-conference bonus material sparked by a paper sent to us from back in 2013. Turns out science came within a few electrons of understanding the last great event. Eugene Bagashoff sent me this paper about spherules deposited over a great many regions of the world, implying that the last nova shell struck the Americas, with spherules strewn about the North and Central America regions and parts of South America, Europe, Africa, and even the Middle East. It also suggests that it was northern summer, tilted in towards the sun. This study came out in the summer of 2013 and blamed an exploding comet in the atmosphere. However, doubts soon began to surface, first regarding the age of the event, and it was a measly 200 years disagreement in carbon dating over 12,000 years ago. The original authors shot back, and they dueled back and forth in public papers for weeks, when a paper finally stamped the airburst explanation as wrong and blamed natural wildfires for the spheral creation. So, fast forward to 2018, and they've discovered an actual impact crater, and they said the dating could put it right at the same time as the last great event, just over 12,000 years ago. So we have spheral deposition, evidence of massive wildfires, an actual impact crater, and none of which are on the side of Earth where the mammoths were flash frozen whole, unlike the torn skeletons in Alaskan boneyards. So what accounts for all of this evidence? How do you get evidence of widespread airburst material, but also what appears to be an impactor or powerful electric discharge? How does this freeze the region over the poles when impactors should have either wiped out the mammoths or slowly frozen them such that the food inside would not still be fresh? A good scenario here might be that the nova shell spherules hit this face of the Earth, a larger chunk impacting or discharging in Greenland, with the shell ripping off a large portion of the atmosphere over the top, with north tilted into the sun, right off of Siberia and the Arctic. This would have the chance to cause decompressive freezing, and before we took the stage, Dr. Peratt shared that he believes the introduction of ultra-cold atoms and ions coming into the Birkeland currents and Birkeland sheets could have also contributed to the freezing of those mammoths. Still more episodes coming. Still have the NOVA panel from the conference upcoming in a future video, including Dr. Dunning and Douglas Vogt. Be safe, everyone.
Hello, I'm Paul Laviolette. People tend to put concepts into boxes, and the superwave idea can't be easily put in a box. It's quite complex and complicated. People tend to think that I am proposing exterminations of animals on the Earth by superwaves, and I'm not. All the superwave does is it brings cosmic dust into the solar system, and that's the problem, is the dust. And the dust is the sun sort of draws it in, and then it surrounds the sun and heats up the sun. The star is going to get very aggravated. It's not going to be like solar cycles, you know. It's going to be continual flaring, causing more catastrophes than meteorites and comets hitting the Earth. They occur more frequently. Core explosions, they call them, or galactic core explosions. They occur cyclically. These things do happen quite frequently, but superwave cataclysms can last, in one case, 4,000 years, like at the time of the extinction of Neanderthals. We don't see them coming. It takes us by surprise. You know, you see the bluish-white star in the sky. That indicates the core has exploded and is putting out maybe 100,000 times more energy than it was before. And that creates a sort of a galactic wind that pushes this dust into the solar system. It overpowers the solar wind, and then, so to speak, all hell breaks loose in our solar system. These dark clouds start coming in, the strange forms in the sky, luminous, leery features in the sky. The first 3 days would probably be the worst, based on seeing an eruption that happened recently in another galaxy. So you should try to get cover, you know, tunnel or somewhere underground, escape the radiation, because, you know, superwave is not as bad as the sun, but it can pack quite a wallop for radiation. The killer radiation, though, comes from the sun, and that's when the superwave with its cosmic dust has aggravated the sun to the point of super flare size, like what killed the large mammals, the megafauna at the end of the Pleistocene. And we see evidence of these having happened during the Ice Age in particular. A bunch of dust came into the solar system around 13,000 years ago. And then we were hit with the big super solar flare. It caused climate to go from Ice Age cold to current temperatures just in a matter of days. So here the mammoths were there, and then when the solar flare hit, it kind of flash melted the surface of the ice sheet, produced all these lakes up there. And then you had these dam breakings, and then one lake dumped into the next, and you got this avalanche that came down, and it was just a wall of water going maybe a few hundred miles an hour coming forward, maybe half a mile high, and hundreds, if not 1,000 kilometers long. And anything in its wake would just get pulverized and deposited, bones and everything. Magnetic reversals are caused by these solar events, these super solar flares. Like at the time of the extinction of Neanderthal, that occurred about 41,000 years ago, and that reversal was very rapid. In my dissertation and then the first paper I published about superwaves, I had proposed that these reversals are due to solar flares, and these create a magnetic field opposed to the Earth's magnetic field. So they end up weakening the Earth's field to the point where it almost goes to zero. And we see this at the time of the Neanderthal extinction. The field went to only 5% of its current level. And during that time, there's no protection, and all those solar cosmic rays come in, and well, they got the lethal dose. Now, why we, the humans, managed to survive, maybe we stayed in our caves. It happened at the time they died off was right at the time of the biggest superwave event in the last 100,000 years. I mean, it's the highest brilliant 10 peak in the record there. And in Earth Under Fire, for example, I study flood myths from all over the world, myths about the sun burning the earth, about the people going in caves to get away from the catastrophe, and so on, stuff like that. Science still has not caught up. I mean, they're going to finally learn it a little too late when the superwave arrives, I think, which might be quite soon. But we'll see. Unfortunately, it's a very depressing situation.
Let's talk about deep space radiation. Here's all the different types of particles. We've got solar wind, full of auroral electrons and trapped protons and trapped electrons and in the inner zones. And in particular, we're worried about the solar storm protons, the solar flare protons, and the galactic rays. We're existing in this all the time. The sun is constantly off-gassing hydrogen and atoms and wind. This is just the general solar wind. And when it hits the Earth, and a storm does hit the Earth,
Earth has entered the modern maximum of cosmic rays. It has been decades to centuries since this level of bombardment, and all forecasts indicate the maximum to intensify for years to come, likely decades more. But do you actually know what a cosmic ray is? Voyagers. That's the best name for their lifetimes, as they spend eons zipping through space, missing most of everything, sometimes even passing right through a galaxy. They are produced in powerful events like supernova blasts, cosmic jets like quasars and blazars, and even in wild orbital binary stars on close approach. These energetic events in space can energize and accelerate particles to nearly the speed of light, which traveled through the cosmos, and the one we're riding here seems to have found the Milky Way. These are coming from every direction and pound the upper atmosphere every square meter every second. So as we see the particle cascade, which truly happens in the blink of an eye, know that the initial particle blasts up high out every moment from just about everywhere above you. So what sort of particle has been on that journey that ended in Earth's atmosphere? The vast majority are protons and atomic nuclei, atoms stripped of electrons by the energetic event that created them. All that remains is the core of the atom with varying energy levels based on their nuclear proton number. The particles are what hit the upper atmosphere every meter every second, and indeed, the cosmic ray spends 99.999% of its life as that cosmic ray. But when it hits the upper atmosphere, or the mantle in the case of superenergetic cosmic rays, there is a particle cascade that begins as the collisions intensify and more protons, positrons, electrons, neutrons, X-rays, and gamma rays are produced in showers that overlap each other all the time. This animation is only showing one. For those wondering about radiation risk on airplanes, our recent Earth-to-Sky calculus study found that about a dental X-ray worth of radiation is what the passengers got. Now, the interesting thing about this was that the detectors could only detect X-rays, gamma rays, and neutrons, all relevant and worth finding, but they missed the electric particles. The wave energy and neutral matter added up to that dental X-ray, but there really is no good way of knowing how much else was taken in. There is also the type of health effect that we're watching for. The total dose is related to organ failure from total system exposure, which does matter, but is uncertain due to those charged particles being unaccounted for. But the cosmic rays themselves and the neutrons can also alter or destroy DNA, and that is simply a matter of chance. 1 million particles could miss your DNA in a high total dose scenario, but just one can come through in a quiet time and hit the right portion of the helix. For more on why we are in the cosmic ray maximum, how bad it's going to get, and the effects on the weather, earthquakes, and our health, see the video called Energy from Space, linked directly beneath this one in the description box. Eyes open, no fear. Be safe, everyone.
Was before, and that creates a sort of a galactic wind that pushes this dust in. Hello, I'm Paul Laviolette.
Oh, wait a minute, we already did that one. Hold on.
But I'm going to show you what has been hidden from you for two reasons. Industry partnerships with government research that create commercial products with patent protection, and that the government has no idea what to do about a bigger problem. You are about to have your eyes open. And because what I'm about to show you, well, I don't care. You need to know. This game is about to end. We know now that several sun-sized stars have a specific period or cyclical nova event that is not exactly like a supernova, but casts off trillions of tons of mass in huge events. Even solar storms that are 10 times larger than the Carrington event would cause massive catastrophes on any planet not protected by a geomagnetic field. So let's go back 3.5 billion years ago. Your new collective has found a habitable planet along a star lane that shows a warm planet, a breathable atmosphere, and possibly some new assimilations. Vibrant and alive with life, but it's an anomaly. It has a huge atmosphere without a geofield, not knowing that you are arriving after the field collapsed and that this little world is no longer protected. Your collective thinks, how can that be? Then the alarm clock goes off 120 million miles away on the star of the system, and a huge recurring micronova event occurs that blasts trillions of tons of mass out into the planets of the system. The first flash of X-ray, gamma ray, and ultraviolet, when it happens, cause the oceans to boil, and you watch the atmosphere expand and begin to be blown off into space by the solar wind. Then 24 hours later, when the first debris shock wave arrives, the atmosphere is peeled off and stripped away as the planet rotates into the maelstrom of micrometeors and debris that rips the atmosphere off and blows it off into space. the atmospheric pressure drops to nearly zero. The water in the oceans, rivers, and lakes flash freeze into ice. Any clouds drop out of the sky and fall to the surface or blow off into space. In the days thereafter, the nova debris creates dust that buries the frozen oceans and lakes in layer after layer of dust as the nova debris field passes and moves out to the outer solar system. And when the Mars Global Surveyor reached Mars, what we found is a freeze-dried planet with no geofield, nearly no atmosphere, with subsurface magnetic bubbles covered in dust. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Mars. A freeze-dried planet being sandblasted for eternity. An atmosphere you cannot breathe. The perfect prison planet. You cannot live on the surface, and the constant sound of the wind blowing will last and last. It will last as long as this lasts, the thing that caused it. The sun will not stop exhausting mass into the solar system, and we should be very, very grateful every day that life is only here because we have something deep inside the Earth that deflects the wind of our star and keeps surface life safe. Mars is the perfect example of planets that lose their magnetic field. The 3,000-mile scar of the early D-ring magnetic collapse at Val Marineris, huge shield volcanoes from the heavy bombardment that helped form the atmosphere, frozen oceans and meteor impacts are the artifacts of a dead planet. And all the while, the clock ticks on. The solar cycle, the Glassberg cycle, and the newly learned about cycle, the vote reset clock cycle, every 12,068 years. And now the good stuff. Why isn't what I'm about to show you widely known? Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts found that there is $21 trillion missing from the Department of Defense and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, military, and housing. It's not missing. It's been spent. Where was it spent? The global space budget was $344 billion in 2016. The U.S. spent $90 billion, but really it's much larger if you add in the covert and clandestine projects out of congressional oversight. We spend 2 or 3 times that amount, and that's just outer space. That's a lot of money by any measure, but why spend it? In 1947, something scared the crap out of the military high command when they analyzed the Nazi technology they took from Germany in 1945 and 46, and how the Germans got so far ahead of us. The German scientists said they captured technology from alien spacecraft and had back-engineered it. We then found the 16mm movies of these exotic propulsion system tests that showed a vehicle levitating and slowly ascending with no means of propulsion.
Now, discussions with the German scientists, we had discussions. General Trudeau told me one day, it took us 5 years to fully develop the transistor that somebody else started, and the integrated circuit. If we didn't have the help, like Oprah says, and we've been helped, and Smith said, the boys upstairs, it would have taken us 250 years.
Then one evening on a remote ranch in New Mexico, on the night of June 14, 1947, the military high command realized the Nazi scientists were not lying.
Some of the material that we picked up weighed anything. Looked like it was weightless. You couldn't feel that you had anything in your hands. I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a fall of a pack of cigarettes. It was that thin. One of my boys told me, there's something unusual here. He said, I tried to make a dent in this metal. He said, you can't bend it. You can't make a mark on it. So I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off it.
It didn't look like plane crash. It didn't look like aluminum or burnt aluminum, because I've seen a lot of that in stainless steel. But what it looked like, of course, it didn't have any in those days. What it looked like more, it was a real light gray, almost to white. And some of it was a real dark gray, but it looked more like what fiberglass might look like today. And it wasn't dead or anything, and there wasn't any dents, but what it was, it's in pieces, looked like it had been twisted and shredded and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't see any real sharp dents. Of course, I didn't stand there and look at it either, It's just what I noticed on the way going out.
It was aluminum in appearance. There were fragments of aircraft skin or whatever the thing was, and also some girders with pictures of hieroglyphic-like things on it. Anyhow, it was interesting. I did get to handle the material, and the material had some peculiar properties. If you squeeze it up in your hand as hard as you could, let go, and it returned originally to the original shape, instantly.
And pieces of string or something like the monofilament fishing line. And then the foil, like tin foil or red foil, but you couldn't crease it and make it stay. I only had one little jagged piece of it. You bend it over, make a crease, and you straighten right back out. And it wouldn't, I don't know, it had to hit with a terrific force because you couldn't cut that wood, the string, or the foil, and it wouldn't burn. And of course that was kind of before the days of plastic, so it could have been some type of plastic metal.
What was it that was actually loaded on board you saw? Well, we had just packages of wrapping paper, and one of them was triangle shaped, about 2.5 feet across the bottom, and the rest were in smaller packages, about shoebox size.
The triangle shape, is that an unusual kind of package?
It seems to be.
And this was brown paper on the outside?
Right, with tape.
And did you actually load the stuff?
Yes.
What was your feeling when you...
Well, just like I picked up an empty package.
By the end of July, the National Security Act was implemented. 2 months later, in September, the CIA was founded, and more of these craft were found.
I was attached to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States Pacific Fleet as a member of his intelligence briefing team at his headquarters in Makalapa, Hawaii. The documents in Grudge 13 were the history of downed craft, alien craft that had crashed because the powerful radar that we were experimenting with after World War II somehow interfered with their guidance systems and caused them to crash. Quite a few alien craft crashed, and we were able to recover wreckage and in some cases whole craft that appeared not to be damaged.
The Pentagon and the CIA were faced with a dilemma. They did not control the nation's skies. Was there an imminent threat of an alien invasion? Do we have time to back engineer their technology? More money than ever before was mobilized to address this threat.
And during a dinner party with a very, very close friend, the dinner party was somewhere in the mid-1950s. I assume it was between 1955 and 1957. A RAND employee was invited during that party, after several drinks, that the government was spending more money on anti-gravity than any other project in the history of this country. And therefore, he believed at that time that we had actually operational anti-gravity systems.
Parity was the plan. It took billions of dollars to figure out how these craft were powered. And here's the first secret kept from you. We figured it out. I can only tell you so much, but enough not to violate the National Security Act. I can't show you the classified details of the manufacturing processes. That would get me suicided. But unclassified materials, well, that's fair game. We first found that the propulsion system operated with an unusual and unidentifiable material that reacted to light, causing a lifting effect and a gravity field. A U.S. scientist identified the material containing an element of very high nuclei mass. A team of U.S. and Russian scientists then created element 117 in the lab. Element 117 has a half-life of about 30,000th of a second in its pure form. But it's all in the details. It's not element 117 that power these craft. It's element 118. Like mercury is a liquid and gold is a solid next to each other on the periodic table, 118 is stable. It was created, then promoted that it could not be created in the literature for this reason. It cost $1 trillion to figure this out. The study of superconductivity was created based on the propulsion system of these recovered craft. pure element 118, alloyed in an oxide, is stable and can be excited into a superconducting state. This material reacts to light. Blasting pulses of high-energy photons, X-rays, into the superconductor create certain high-frequency hot vibrations, phonons, within the superconductor that absorb energy and increase in intensity. Upon lattice excitation, interbilayer superconducting coherence is transiently enhanced at the expense of intrabilayer coupling, creating a region that can tap the electric vacuum energy 0 point. The excitation creates the transient state zone, and photons entering the transient state zone break into electrons and positrons that further break down into the component kinetic energy particles of the construction and accelerate into and out of the electric vacuum orders of magnitude beyond the speed of light. The excitation of a superconductor creates a self-generating toroidal over-unity field that can attenuate magnetic and gravitic fields. This power generator system can accelerate and decelerate a craft along magnetic and electric lines of flux like the electrons in a geomagnetic field. It's similar to the spinning levitating magnets we've all seen, just bigger, like 30 meters in diameter. This image was given to me during my tenure at Space Station in 1992. It was taken by the district prosecutor of Puebla, Mexico on his way to American University and developed at the police crime lab in Puebla. I can verify the authenticity. This is the third generation after Roswell. Here is recently declassified footage of the same craft in flight. You can see the field around the craft.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Oh, I'll take it. It's not LNS though, is it? It's not. Yeah, LNS. Well, here's another thing. It's rotated.
Let's slow it down now for a better look. This footage was taken aboard a U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet. The unaltered footage was captured by a Raytheon Advanced Targeting Forward-Looking Infrared ATFLR pod sensor in infrared mode. The airspeed is 238 knots with a 120-knot headwind. Hot targets are black in the BLK mode and cold targets are white. The field around the craft is expanded and produces a white glow around the dark, hot, and concentrated field flow into the superconductor. Basic thermodynamics in plain view, seen in this Raytheon imaging system. This means that propulsion is unaffected by atmospheric conditions. The fourth generation was captured in photographs in Scotland and at high altitude. The Delta configuration was to improve flight in the atmosphere with a central generator and 3 stabilizers. Now the 7th generation, the TR-3B, is under construction at Palmdale, transported to Groom Lake and Papoose Lake hangars at Area 51 at Nellis on 22nd Airborne flights out of Travis Air Force Base. This control deck, manned by 4 crew, is the most advanced flying machine ever created, utilizing technology from off-planet that can leave the atmosphere, achieve orbit, submerge to 1,000 feet of ocean, and travel along the magnetic field connections in the solar system. And the second law of motion dictates once on the magnetic field line, acceleration never stops. It can reach unheard of velocity in space with an intrinsic electromagnetic field that protects the crew from all forms of space radiation. I will get a call about this or a visit. But there's more. In 1957, another threat became apparent, the sun. In 1957, the sun produced 2,500 solar flares that affected military communication systems. The Pentagon had to know how much a threat it was, so it created NASA in 1958, a year later. Ostensibly in a space race, but in fact with a mandate to explore the planets to find evidence of solar effects. The moon was the perfect place to look first. The sun has been shining on the moon for 4.5 billion years. The Apollo program cost $30 billion in public funds and twice that in clandestine mission operations. Then in 1976, a private solar scientist, Douglas Vogt, discovered evidence that the sun had a cyclical micronova event, much like other stars, that better explained the end of ice ages and mass extinction events, a recurring micronova every 12,068 years. His book was sent to various universities and scientists when it was released, and he received this reply from one of the recipients of his book. In a letter from Kenneth Cussman, Mr. Vogt was told, "I have a cousin who is an astrophysicist and professor at University of Alaska. In 1973, he told me of an impending disaster that takes place every 12,000 to 15,000 years. He said that many scientists are aware of this, and that the covert reason for the space program was to explore this disaster throughout the solar system, moon landings, planetary probes, etc. He also said we do not have the technology or the foreseeable technology to avoid this inevitable situation. All we can hope to do is gather information." Interesting. But only the sun would leave evidence throughout the solar system. Although the moon produced evidence that was collected and analyzed, the Earth was more problematic. But Mr. Vogt found the evidence in the geologic record. The KT boundary iridium content is found in glass beads within the KT boundary, exactly like the ones found on the moon, with the same fission tracks and isotopes that can only be found in the sun. If the solar micronova might have killed the dinosaurs, might it kill us as well? After contact by agents of the CIA, it became clear to Mr. Vogt that the government already was aware of this. Then came the missions to Mars, billions of dollars and scores of spacecraft from Russia and America that provided the same evidence. In huge glass bead sand dunes found all over the planet, collected and concentrated in craters and plains by the never-ending wind. There is no tectonic plate motion on Mars, only wind and sun. The missions to get a habitat on the moon and Mars may be a desperate attempt to have some nucleus of the human race survive what is coming. It was finally realized in the 1980s that there was a coming inevitable solar event, an event that could not be shielded against except deep inside mountains and underground. So they decided to spend money on inner space and started to dig. The Air Force invented a boring machine that has been reinvented to drill all over the world various types of tunnels. They cut through rock with diamond bits. They're fast. Casing machines are sent into the bored-out tunnels to line the walls with waterproof casing and utility lines. And they have been constructed and supplied since the 1980s in earnest. Mostly here and in Russia.
You got an underground roadway system here that runs all the way to Maine, to Washington, D.C., to Colorado. It's fully stocked. It runs completely underground. And you can see they've been hauling tons of military equipment. They're stocking all these bases. Now, the other thing is,
They are powered by fusion reactors, and here's your second reveal. We have fusion power. We have fusion power for these subterranean bases because it's clean and no radioactive waste. A little background on how this was achieved. Pons and Fleischmann proposed in the 80s that lithium hydroxide could be used as an electrolyte in a cold fusion experiment where a palladium electrode is saturated with deuterium under a current, attracting the deuterium to the palladium in order to utilize the Coulomb pressure between the palladium atoms in the crystal to fuse the deuterium into helium, producing heat. Good idea, but they failed because they didn't realize the deuterium in the electrolyte rotated around one of its nucleons and it wobbled and could not nest in the interstitial spaces between the atoms in the palladium crystal, thereby preventing fusion by its Coulomb pressure force. It just wouldn't sit still, and a lithium grease developed around the electrode. At Caltech in 2004, I was developing a new subatomic particle theory, and based on my findings, I proposed that instead of deuterium, they should have used the more stable gas form deuteron that has a much smaller rotation radius. Both make helium, but one requires far less energy to fuse. And it doesn't wobble around so much. Back in 2010, I believe the Japanese achieved success and it was immediately suppressed. It worked. We surface dwellers will still have to suffer under the nuclear, oil, and solar power cabal. And that will definitely give me a visit late at night or very early in the morning, guns drawn. The tunnels and bases are even under the ocean, but all require an access system to get to the tunnels and down to the bases. Need evidence of this activity?
Because during the 90s, I could never figure out why are the elevator company stocks and the mining company stocks going up. This doesn't make any sense. And then I started reading this Solar report and I realized, They're not mining for metal, they're building the underground bases. And they need lots of elevators.
All of this is known at the highest levels of government, industry, and is far above top secret. The reason we are kept in the dark is simple. They really don't know what to do. They have no plans other than to save their own asses in these deep military bases. Why is Bezos really digging a cave in the desert at his launch site? People know. Now you do too. But humans have remembered these events where they survived, in caves and caverns, and left stone-etched rock drawings of the sun blasting out, planets being hit, things flying into the sky, beings with unfamiliar appearances and unfamiliar clothing, and messages left in stone so that future people are reminded by evidence that we have had help by others, not from here. So what to do? Are there only 10,123 days left before the next micronova? There is a lot of advice I could give you, but this is the best I can come up with.
Perhaps I'm old and tired, but I think that the chances of finding out what's actually going on are so absurdly remote that the only thing to do is to say, hang the sense of it and keep yourself busy. I'd much rather be happy than right any day. And are you? No. Well, that's where it all falls down, of course.
First of all, don't panic. Whatever time left or not, one thing is certain. Spend it wisely and don't wait to pursue your dreams.
Episode 21. We go back to where we began, with the classified Chan Thomas book, The Adam and Eve Story, and the post-loop that has finally been revealed beyond the sanitized version the CIA did release. It not only furthers the resolve surrounding a catastrophe cycle on Earth, but it proves that the government hid support for the plasma universe and continued to try to hide it even after their release of the sanitized copy. The catastrophe cycle is a legitimate double conspiracy, both the story of our planet and the direction of modern physics away from reality. But first, we will examine the premise built on the preceding episodes as a foundation, and the foundation is simple. The disaster is coming. There are coincidences you just don't ignore. Like when a story by an Air Force major details a fossil record of magnetic reversal-driven mass death events on Earth, with the CIA and Pentagon to which he reported, saying they happened 12,000 years apart. And when an accountant surveys available literature, lining up the numbers in the exact same way, even while having to decode carbon-14 dating changes in the 90s. And when the evidence of magnetic reversals, mass extinctions, and the appearance of new species have a suspiciously similar periodicity, with carbon dating error ranges potentially being high due to ice sheet cosmic ray shielding and only half of Earth facing the sun or galactic center at any given time, taking the brunt of a burst. The patterns described by Robert Felix walked in the footsteps of Cuvier, Hibbins, and Deleuze, and they seem to involve cataclysmic shifts of the planet's rotation or tilt, with inundations of the sea, and with the shift of Earth's magnetism. We have, of course, seen the rapid acceleration of Earth's changing magnetism over the last 100 years, and are about due for the next cycle event by nearly every approximation available in this realm. We have even seen an outside look at the longer and more cataclysmic million-year cycle from Dr. Rayskin that cannot escape the trinity of magnetic reversal, sea level disruption, and mass extinction. With this, we must ask a question which we will seem to answer and then later have to reconsider. Is this a linear process when the galaxy or sun triggers the Earth's disaster, or do the changes at various scale occur in unison and harmony, with linear processes added on top of them? The fact that Earth's magnetic field has already begun its shift, without the great solar flash or impacting galactic superwave, forces one to think that perhaps this is not linear, but that resonant, harmonious clock process where the interconnectedness is showing us signs on Earth before the crescendo. We'll fight that magical notion momentarily. Because now we come back to the beginning. The entire reason this collective has now begun to re-examine a catastrophe story after 5 years' leave. The CIA declassified a highly sanitized, 57-page version of the Adam and Eve story, which most of us had never heard of. We had no idea just how sanitized it was, but we could tell from the structure and foreshadowing that more was missing. It was all we had. So we began by exploring that most extreme version of the catastrophe in Chapter 1, and by seeing that the foundation of debunking that crustal displacement theory came from a bachelor's degree authored paper from a CIA-controlled department at Columbia University, and from a paper describing a historical pole position record which would debunk the crustal motion, but which had corrections to the article, some of which put the pole positions in history 180 degrees longitude away from their previous guess, and nearly that far in latitude. That correction paper was lost in the literature. The debunking paper pressed on. 57 pages of flowery detail describing a disruption to Earth's low-velocity zone plasticity due to an electromagnetic disruption that allows the crust to shift. That was all we had. And then Adrian D'Amico and Gary Long stepped up. They found, hunted down, and received the full Chan Thomas work, and it includes a postlude of incredible bounty, and which might actually explain the reason for its classification and heavy sanitization thereafter. As you might know, Adrian has been my friend for more than 20 years, and he runs a UFO, ET, cultural, political threats, and conspiracy channel called Suspect Sky. He and Gary went next level hunting this down and bringing it to you. On SuspectSky.com, you can find a link to a full page-by-page turning of the Adam and Eve story and the postlude performed by Gary Long. Highly recommend you check it out. Now here is what I took away from the postlude. It is hard to deny that it's all about the big event. The book describes the mammoths in detail and how the mud in which they were encased, not ice, indicated that a tsunami of frigid ice and tundra and soil was thrust upon it. We heard this from Dr. Laviolette not long ago. The strata of Earth, being another evidentiary layer, shows the homogeneity not possible without the catastrophe. There's a fascinating bit about the asteroid belt being a destroyed planet, which favors many of the ancient stories and the resonance model of the solar system. He spoke of various survivors in various regions who did not receive as bad of wind and tsunamis as other areas, and if you think about it, anywhere a petroglyph was carved is a place where they survived, at least initially. And then Gary turned the page again and my heart literally stopped. I almost fell. There it was, that name. It just so happens that Chan Thomas, like the great Anthony Peratt, is a student of Hannes Alfvén and the plasma universe. His focus on magnetohydrodynamic power is one of the great mystery solvers in the universe, especially because our planetary low-velocity zone plasticity that is holding the crust in place is a function of it, internally, geomagnetically, and it can be disrupted. The next part is critical, because Chan Thomas makes a mistake. His position is that the event is galactic, but not a superwave. The magnetic null zone crossing, called a reversal region of the galaxy, which would cause Earth's low-velocity zone to lose its plasticity and for the crust to shift, exactly as we heard in episode 1 of this series. The magnetic nulls are, in fact, what we now well understand to be called current sheets, in this case at the galactic level. The trigger we hypothesized in earlier episodes is indeed where the galactic interstellar magnetic fields change direction, and that is exactly what Chan Thomas is talking about. We have recently seen bolstered evidence of this field in all galaxies with the presence of nanodust in the interstellar medium, statically clinging to the electric field double layer like dust on a Swiffer. The national labs and NASA have begun to go plasma universe, and at the galactic scale that means that the galactic nucleus is where a plasma current meets the electric field, which is where the galaxy is found. And if there is one thing we know from the science of magnetohydrodynamics, the stories of the ancients, and the evidence here and on the moon, It is that the sun gets involved as well. Chan Thomas misses this completely. And we revisit the linearity of the event now to challenge the magical interconnectedness that tantalized our imagination minutes ago. The current sheet is likely to be broad, but the reversal of the galactic fields to be predominant and fast in the middle of the sheet. It is magnetically null because one sheet and one hemisphere fields flows out from the galactic center, and the other sheet and other hemispheric fields come back in, canceling the magnetism right in the middle, just like in the heliospheric current sheet in the solar system. So we would expect to enter the double layer and begin the magnetic reversal process long before the field influence switched and the sun began to rock and roll. Furthermore, it is hard to imagine a galactic event triggering the Earth, but not the sun. This could truly be a multiple event catastrophe. So what is the point of all this? Again, that we are survivors. For you and your children's sake, there needs to be a plan just in case. And in lieu of living your life in fear, knowing what to do in those first moments is important. Are you hunkering down? Are you getting out of an urban area? Are you getting supplies ready? Or are you planning on know-how after the event? Enjoy life responsibly. We are here to learn and fail and enjoy and try and love. You may pay for poor decisions in this life or elsewhere. Your awareness may make the difference in what DNA makes it to the next stage. The global petroglyph library and rocket survival sites is a great reassurance of our endurance, and we'll need it, because Novus Tempus is coming. Chan Thomas believed the next event was imminent, like many other voices we've heard. But more importantly, his focus on Alphane and plasma universe principles is probably the explanation for its classification. Not only is this the doorway to unlimited universal energy, but understanding the planet and the power to control the people's minds about it, not to mention superweapons, anti-gravity, and anything you or the craziest person you can think of can think of. I can think of some reasons to keep it secret, and I can think of some more important things at stake right now, however, like the continuity of our species. I cannot implore you enough to go back and watch the 20-odd episodes in this series, linked below. We're not done yet either. Be safe, everyone.
All right, folks. We're all caught up. Wow. Mind-blowing, huh? If this is your first time to tune into the Mindheaf series with Suspicious Observer, I implore you to go to our page, click on the video area, and take a look at all the other parts that we've uploaded already. Total of 5. So today we're all caught up to date. He'll be doing more, and once those come out, I will stream it here live on the Howard Experience Show, Mindheaf series. Thank you for watching, and remember, be prepared, eyes open, no fear. Peace out, everybody.